This is the School Success Podcast, a podcast for school leaders to learn from other school leaders what's working and what's not, and to get inspiration and encouragement, as well as strategies to grow school enrollment, connect with families, retain teachers, recruit teachers, and everything in between. You guys are heroes, and I cannot thank you enough for pouring into this next generation that's coming behind us. My goal is you will take at least one thing away from every episode that you can take back to your school to make it better than it is right now. Please enjoy the School Success Podcast. This podcast is brought to you by the Herzog Foundation.
Time for school.
Hey, school success makers. Welcome to another edition of the School Success Podcast. I'm your host, Mitchell Slater, and I'm joined by a good friend of mine out of Boise, Idaho, Wade Ortego, who's the head of school of the Ambrose School over in, of course, Boise, Idaho. And he is doing some awesome things at the school. I've heard great things. I've obviously met him in person at conferences, which always makes these podcast episodes way more fun. But then him and I were joking at the beginning of all this, and at the moment of recording this, my family had evacuated out of Florida to get away from Hurricane Milton that was coming in. So I'm literally in my mother-in-law's house in the junk room to do this recording, because I'm like, the show must go on. And then, Wade here, he looks like he actually has a legit school background back there, but he didn't want to talk about that. But it looks legit to me. So we're going to have a lot of fun on today's episode. But before we jump into all that fun stuff, I'm going to pass it off to Wade just to do a quick introduction of himself. So Wade, welcome to the podcast today.
Thanks for having me, Mitchell. Yes, my background is an actual office. It's an actual messy office. So there you go. But it is the way I live. I didn't fix it up for you when you called in. So I've been at Ambrose 5 years now. This will be my fourth school to be a part of. I think this is it's one of the schools I've had a ton of fun with. There's just the opportunities here have been incredible. So we have 3 campuses, 2 models. It keeps us busy. I think we'll hit on some of this in some of our topics as well. 2 graduates from here, and now I've got a 4th grader as well. So just loving Idaho, and season changes right now, not dealing with hurricanes. Praise the Lord. I'm glad you guys are good, and hope you get home safe. But happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, hey, I always start with the same question. I don't give anybody a heads up about the question, so you'll tackle it fine, though. I always say, if I was to visit where you are, Boise, Idaho, what would you say, Mitchell? You need to eat this and do this to experience Boise, Idaho.
Oh, wow. So, there's much drama over finger steaks in this state, which are chicken, like steak fingers, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay.
But Idaho claims these things. I won't say potatoes, although, yeah, that's Idaho. And if you are here, depending on the season, you should either ski or you should fish. So if you're fly fishermen, that's definitely the reason to come on out. I see some poles back there. So, yeah.
Okay. All right. That sounds good. So I gotta clarify here. You said steak fingers. Are we talking actual steak, or are we talking chicken fingers?
No, they look like chicken fingers, but they're actual steak.
Okay. And it's fried?
It's fried. There's much drama over this, over where these started. I'm originally from Texas. These things are maybe it's more personal than it should be, because I'm just surprised that Idaho lays claim to that. But they are tasty, and if you're out here, you should probably grab them.
So, I mean, steak and potatoes. That sounds pretty classic to me. That sounds pretty good.
It's hard to go.
Well, before we jump into kind of like three main things I'd love to jump into that we kind of talked about beforehand. I know obviously you guys are a classical Christian school. I would love for those that are listening that maybe haven't heard of classical, or maybe aren't super familiar with it, if you could kind of just give the quick, I would say, elevator pitch, whether people like it or not, of like, hey, what is classical education, so that people kind of know exactly what the Ambrose School is about.
Yeah, that's a touchy topic for people, right? Everyone has their own little spin on it. For me, classical ed has been time tested, great books, great conversation, trying to hone students' loves towards those things that we've known as true, good, and beautiful. So we lean real hard that direction. For Ambrose, it looks to us like just really good conversations around great ideas that have formed Western Civ and continue to push that into our culture and communities. So.
Very good. Thank you. Well, I think that's a perfect thing to jump right into our first one. We're talking about mission drift. So I know we've talked with schools before that we work with, and they feel like they had a couple hires come in, and then they maybe had a different idea of what the mission should be. And after a while, suddenly you're just like not the school that's recognizable as you were before. Maybe you let certain students and families in that maybe don't fit the mission of the school, and quickly that can change the mission drift of the school. I know you've been at a few different schools, so I would love to just kind of hear what are some suggestions for the audience listening of like, hey, here's how you can keep mission drift from happening at your school.
Yeah, it's a couple of different things, and it's definitely something that we have focused on here as we've added campuses. I mean, you add an entire school to your system, that's going to pull and, stretch you for sure. I've had the opportunity to speak with a lot of Christian college um, presidents, and some of their hiring practices have been super, um, convicting at times, but also just helpful when you realize how much time they actually spend with the people they're hiring. Um, just great conversations. So trying to spend time with those people individually, off topic, not dealing with like curriculum. I think a lot of times we want to hone in and we want the best Latin teacher. We want the best, humanities teacher who knows like medieval architecture. Well, what we really need is someone who loves kids and loves what we're doing, loves the kingdom, loves Christ. Are they leaning into those things more than just are they content specialists? So are they like-minded in how they see the world around them? It was really hard for Ambrose. We added another campus that was a completely different model, so a collaborative model. There's philosophies around like why you're doing a 5-day school versus a collaborative model school. And you have to it took us a lot of heartache. I mean, I think there were tears. There was a lot of, pushing and pulling, trying to work, like, how do we make this work under the umbrella of Ambrose? Like, we want it to be similar. We want it to be pushing and rowing in the same way, but we know we're going to do it a little bit different. So I think of the philosophy of who you're bringing on, who's running those things. Do you really see the critical things eye to eye, and can you be open with one another on things that aren't as important, that are periphery? I think another area of drift is just with your board. Like, as you add board members and as board members phase out, you lose some institutional knowledge, you lose some ideas. As a growing school and a changing school, that was big for us. How do we continue to do the thing we set out to do in good times and bad? So when the Lord's blessing you and you have more people coming, we could talk all about the differences of how like Boise has changed since COVID. We had the great tidal wave from the West Coast that came in, and those families have been great for us, but a lot of it was sourcing through, are we really connected on the right level? Are we really connected for the right things? Do we see children in the same way? Do we see education the same way? Those things sustain you, I think, in your day-to-day operations. Your board being aligned and committed, and aware, like making sure you're onboarding board members intelligently, strategically, so they know the history. Give them the history of the school, and do they love that, or do they see it as like what we need is institutional change? You're like, oh, let's talk more about that. What do you mean? Um, do we need a different parking lot institutional change, right? And why? Do we need a different curriculum? Like, what kind of institutional change are board members thinking of when they bring up topics like that? And that's a lot of work. I mean, that's a lot of work for a head of school. It's your job to bring those guys in and have them committed to the long-term vision and mission of the school.
Sure. Would you say then that also schools to have mission drift, you need to have a mission to begin with? Of like, if you're just like, we're just gonna swing for the fences, bring on anybody, and then what we find, like, so if schools have mission drift, they need to have a specific mission for the school, then, correct?
Yeah, 100%. And I think the startup schools probably deal with this a little bit more because your mission isn't what's funded. Do you know, I mean, so a lot of times you're just like, oh, we're going to be a school. And then as money comes in for certain projects, that becomes, because you can pay for that. So your mission is like, what's the easy path? That's actually probably not the greatest mission. When you sit back, is that really what you set out to do? Or does that seem like, oh, that's great. We should obviously lean in this direction. I think you better have an understanding of who you want to be before you get the ability to be it. And that's hard for startups, I think.
It's hard because you see the dollar signs of like, well, here's what we are, but like this one's a little bit different. This family's a little different, but you know what? We need that tuition dollar, so you let somebody in, and then by the time you look at it, you're like, none of these people even match our mission of like what we're trying to do as a school, but we have the money at least. That's great, but then I seen that happen, and I'm like, man, that makes me frustrated and sad for these schools that are doing that. That feel like they have to do that. And obviously you're starting off literally with mission drift immediately if you go down that route, which is scary.
Well, you're really a drift, right? You don't have mission drift. You're a drift, period. Like you have no anchoring pieces to move from, and it's going to feel fluid. It's going to feel like, hey, we're making tons of progress. But the reality is like you're just probably just sitting in an eddy, just drifting back and forth because good things are happening. So the water's going up, like the tide's rising, but you're actually not headed anywhere.
Mm.
And that will play out pretty quick with your families.
Yeah. Well, I feel like that would play right into like literally our second question of like burnout. And so like if you're having that and you have no mission and you are frustrated with maybe the families you have or the staff that maybe aren't meeting that or board that's not meeting that, you could have burnout. And I know that can come from head of school as well as just your teachers and other
Yeah.
leaders of the school. How do you guys maybe at the Ambrose School or for those listening, if you could have some encouragement for them to like how to avoid that burnout so they don't leave the profession altogether?
Yeah, we've suffered from it, man, for sure. I think a school that's been around as long as ours has had the ups and downs. We've repeated the mistake more than we should have. But you talk about the good times, then you have to talk about the bad times as well. There's often times where everybody's, you're all rowing the same direction, so it feels really good. But everyone's rowing double time because they're doing every job. And I think that's how a lot of younger schools or, especially heads of school, like you have to do it all. There's no the capacity is like, no, there are no supermen. No one gets to do that. You're gonna have to, you're gonna have to find people that can help you. Um, this could be a board. I think some of the best work the board can do is to make sure the head of school actually has the resources and the time to actually do the work they need to do. Um, and that feels counterintuitive because I think a lot of boards are just like, well, this guy's going to do it. We hired him. Why isn't he doing it? It's like, because he can't do everything. No one can. And that's the same for a board. When you have a startup board, they're pulling all the strings. They're carrying all the load to help get the thing started. That gets really hard later on when you need them to actually be like objective outside thinkers, but they're so entrenched in founding school and starting it. And the frustration of putting so much effort in and you're wondering if people are recognizing those efforts. No, right? That's the reality of the job. So I think finding outside people to hang out with, right? People that are in the industry who are doing the job can understand it, but actually they're not in your town. They're not working with you. That's going to be instrumental in helping them, helping you get some rest and relaxation and get some outside input. At the same time, you just need some hobbies. It sounds cheesy, or I think it sounds cheesy, a pretty like business oriented kind of guy. And I like working on the job. Like, so I enjoy what I do, but that doesn't replace, like, you still need outside things to do, and you need to give people permission to tell you that you haven't,
Mm.
right? You need people who are outside your circle, who know you, your church, not necessarily people at work, but other people that have known you maybe before you started doing this to be like, hey, wait, what you're doing right now seems chaos. Right? There seems like there's a lot of chaos in your life. Or have you taken some time? Have you thought about like you need to get away with your family? You need to give people permission to like speak into your life like that. And you're going to say, no, I'm too busy. I've got these things to do. And what you're doing is just cooking yourself, because you're trying to carry more than you were ever intended to carry, which is a lot of ego, right? Like if you're the only dude that can do the job, like, yeah, what's Jesus for? I don't know. Like, I don't know. I thought I had to do this, right? No, you can't. You're not the only person on earth. There's other people that you need to get with you to help you do the thing. But often we're so busy because we haven't taken time to step back to go, am I really considering what my world around me is doing? Have I talked to my friends? Do I have friends? Right? Those are things you need to be engaged with. And being willing to hear good, solid advice. So
Hey, school success makers, Mitchell here. I just want to take a really quick break from the show to give a big, huge shout out to the Herzog Foundation. I absolutely love the Herzog Foundation. I've been friends and partners with them for a couple years now, but we're bringing it to a whole new level. And I'm excited to share that our very own School Success podcast is now featured on the Herzog Foundation Podcast Network. The Herzog Foundation is a powerhouse of resources designed to support schools like yours, from free training events through the Herzog Foundation Institute to their incredible online news publication, The Lion, and of course, our new podcast, Home. They have everything you need to stay informed and inspired. And if you're dreaming of starting your own Christian school or co-op, don't miss their online course, Schoolbox. It's a fantastic resource to help you get started on the right foot. At School Success, we're proud to partner with the Herzog Foundation to bring you these valuable tools and insights. So visit herzogfoundation.com to explore all they have to offer. Trust me, you won't want to miss out on these amazing opportunities for growth and success. And I love all the people over there, and I know you guys will too. So please, please go check them out, and you won't be disappointed. Now, back to the show. Do you feel like the school should be helping prevent burnout from those that are working for them, or should the people who are possibly experiencing burnout, should they be stepping up on them, on their, like this, to take ownership of this? They're like, hey, I'm feeling this. I need to take ownership of saying I'm feeling this, and here's what I'm going to do to try and prevent this from happening. Or maybe it's a combination of both, but maybe who is more responsible when it comes to the burnout
So
side?
it's got to be both, right? Like at the end of the day, we're responsible for ourselves and our families. So you've got to take ownership. You can't just defer that to somebody else. I think people do that so they can blame somebody else later, right? And the reality is like, no, you have to be responsible for yourself. There's nothing wrong with walking into somebody's office and saying like, guys, I need to take 2 days. I just need to go and regroup. Now you want to do it mindfully, and you want to think about like, I don't want to do it right before, a big break or something's happening. But to be able to say like, I need to take a couple of days to be with my family and do something, that should happen. I think often, you hear teachers say like, oh, it's just easier to do it than to get a sub. It's just easier to do it than to get a sub. Like, yeah, I agree. I know what you're saying. I know what you mean, but it's not as healthy. Like, it's still not as healthy. You need to get the sub sometimes.
Okay.
If you can find them. Like right now, it's been crazy trying to find subs. But the school, like your administration should be thinking about your teachers. What are ways to like support and encourage your teachers? And we've lost teachers because we've just overworked and we expected too much from them. And they give it because they love kids and they want to pour in. They know the impact they're having. So sometimes you need to be able to look at teachers and go like, that's too, like, you're doing too much.
Mm.
Like, take a break. There's a season for this. Like, you need to go home. And so, yeah, you're going to grade, but like grade in your backyard with your kids while they're playing. Don't stay in the office where everybody's gone. And I know it's quieter. There's a ton. This is a big conversation. But you just have to you have to be responsible. And at school, we should be thinking about what's happening to our teachers. We want them for the long haul. So how do we ensure that?
Yeah. You mentioned one that I loved, which was accountability. Like, so having like an accountability partner, and and correct me if I'm wrong, you mentioned like, hey, get somebody that's not inside of your specific like city or area that you're in. It's okay. Let's say somebody's like, yes, I want an accountability partner, but I don't have one. Do you suggest they find somebody that's in the same industry, so they're in education, or somebody who's completely outside of that, somebody who's obviously, if they're a Christian, they need to find a Christian, somebody in their church? Like, okay, let's try to like unpack that a little bit. They go, yes, I want that. Where do they find it, and where should they be looking for?
So yeah, I would say all the above. Like, and all the above. because everyone's get like these great perspectives that come outside. So I've had great input from guys who don't know anything about education, but they know things about people. They know things about work schedule. They know things about personal, maintenance, like how are you maintaining your own personal health and goodwill with your family, those kind of things. But then there's other people who could chime in on the education piece, and it's nice to hear people go, have you thought about, and it actually applies, right? So those things are there. I um I just met people like for within the industry. Met them at conference. I would just go to the ACCS conference and you know walk around and talk to people. I would just call them. I would email them. I think there were a lot of people who were gracious with their time and energy, and I would hope that people would continue to do that. Um, there's also different groups that are connecting. I think all across, whether it's the regional meetings. I think schools should just cold call people. I, it takes a little guts, but I'm going to answer that call. That's something that I'm intrigued by when someone reaches out and goes like, "Hey, you don't know me, but I'm doing X, Y, and Z." Um, I think locally is tougher depending on your school setting, but your church. Are there people within your own church community who have some wisdom? Um, Maybe it's in a different industry. Maybe this is one of those where it's a different industry, but they know what leadership looks like. They know what it means to be responsible for people. So get with them, and then you do have a connection point from the church. They can hold you accountable to that.
Mhm.
Hey, haven't seen you last Sunday. Where were you at? Um, and I also just think business networks within town. Um, and that maybe they have kids at your school, maybe they don't. Maybe they're a vendor of yours. Maybe you just build those relationships and they're just in your area. And you join one of the Christian business networks. Um, I I know if you're in a more rural setting, that's going to be harder to do. But for like us, we have probably two or three Christian networking events that happen throughout the month for different folks. So get plugged into those, but you have to make the time.
Yeah, and I think for me, I know I'll speak in this personally. I know I'm not a specifically an educator, just in the education industry. Is I have multiple, but not a ton, because I feel like you can really only have a few of these to make it work well. So I have like one of mine is my brother-in-law, so my wife's brother. It's like him and we do a devotion together every day through the Bible apps. There's something we're staying accountable there, like with just being in the Word, and then we talk regularly on what's going on, and I feel like I can share openly with him with stuff going on that he can pour into me. I can't do that. I don't feel comfortable doing that with everybody, but I have it with him and two other guys. So like it's three that I can really have somebody speak into me, and I know that they can be really direct with me, and I'm not going to take offense to it. I'm going to be like, nope, you know me, you're right. And I feel like that's the part where you get to be really successful with an accountability partner, is if you get to the point where you're like, you know what, they can be so blunt and honest with me, and I'm not going to be offended by it. I'm actually going to take it and use it. And I feel like if you start getting offended by all the times your accountability partner is telling you to do things, like probably not there yet. You're not in the right spot to benefit from an accountability partner the way it should be.
I agree. I think building the relationship piece of it so that there's a trust, right? Everyone wants to tell you how to do your job.
Mm-hmm.
It's people who want to tell you how to do your job. It's you being able to go like, oh, you know what you said? It was probably a jab, but it was actually probably appropriate, right? Like there's probably a piece of that that's true, and we need to go fix it. I don't like necessarily like the way you said it. That's life. That's being mature enough to deal with it. But you're right. I think you got to build the relationships to know that, hey, these people have my best interest at heart. They're not trying to be punchy. Now, if you're dealing with me, like they're probably being punchy because that's the only way I listen. But um, you know what? There's a point to where you get a relationship going where somebody can say something offhand. You're like, oh, that's actually like I get where you're going. I do need to fix that. It's not meant to tear you down. It's really meant to build you up.
Yep.
Um,
I just heard a saying yesterday, and then I wrote it down, and it said, "Did you know that you can give a compliment in a sarcastic tone and a criticism in a loving tone?" And I was like, huh, because I know I do that with people where I'll be like, I'm gonna give them like some criticism, but I'm gonna do it in a really loving way. So they like they hear it, but they know like, hey, I still love you in this. But then you can also give a compliment in a sarcastic tone. So I don't know. There's just so many, the way you say things, the time that you say it, man, all that stuff is powerful. I know they always say when we growing up, sticks and stones may break my bones, words can never hurt me. I think it's really false. I can say so many words that can hurt people, and so I don't like living by that one, but
Well,
I
and it's
just
also part of what you're trying to do, right? I mean, the heart is like this is part of like you have to make the time and you have to commit to it because you can't have a relationship with someone that's going to grow you and build you if you don't ever see them. Like we obviously we have some old time friends. I have great friends that I haven't seen in years, and if they came to town, we'd pick right up. But that was built over a ton of time we spent together.
yeah.
Now it's more like we have to make the time. You have to do the coffee, like catch up and actually have the relationship before you're probably going to be willing to hear the hard criticism that you really need to hear. But you haven't built the relationships for people either feel safe to tell you or you feel safe enough to not be offended by it. So
Mhm. That's good. Well, I always want to end with like because I want to make sure I be respectful of your time. So I always like to end with the same kind of takeaway. If there was, for those that are listening, if you were to share just, I know this is all advice, but if you were to share one final piece of advice for the school leaders listening, what would that piece of advice be?
um one final piece of advice. Love your family, go to church, commit to it, right? And be a part of it. Um, yeah.
I love it. That's solid. That's good. Good line, good advice to live by. So, Wade, thank you for your friendship. Thank you for your time to hop on the today. You are a busy guy running multiple schools there at the Ambrose School. So I know I don't take it lightly that you took some time to hop on and share to our audience just some of your insights of how many years you've been doing this. So thank you for that. Obviously, looking forward to catching up at the next conference that we see each other at in person. And wishing you guys nothing but the best as you continue to educate and love the students in your care.
Oh, thanks so much. Have a great one.
Well, another huge shout out and a thank you to Wade for taking time and being on the podcast today. I love what he's doing over there in Idaho and at the Ambrose School, and I'm wishing him nothing but the best as they continue to grow and educate the next generation that's coming behind us. And Wade's an awesome guy. If you guys ever have a chance to meet him or go out to Idaho and see the Ambrose School, you definitely should. And as always, I'm hoping you guys are able to take at least one thing away from today's episode that you can take back to your school to make it better than it is right now. Well, you guys are listening to the School Success Podcast. And with that, we have 3 free resources we want to make sure you guys are tuning into and taking advantage of. And the first one, of course, is what you're listening to right now. That is the School Success Podcast. We have episodes dropping every single Monday. So make sure you're tuning back to listening into those. You can, of course, watch them on YouTube as well. And if you go to our website, schoolsuccessmakers.com, in the top right-hand corner, you can choose to get the School Success Report, which is emailed out every week with different articles that our team has written. And we do teacher highlights and shout outs of educators. So you want to make sure you are getting that in your inbox every single week. And then last but not least, we have our free community on Facebook called School Success Makers. We want to make sure you guys are in there meeting other educators and teachers and people all from over the world in the education space. So make sure you go over there and join the School Success Makers Facebook group. I'm personally in there and I would love to meet you guys and hear about your school. Well, I think that's about it. So we'll be here next week again with another amazing guest as usual on the School Success Podcast. We'll see you then. The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of the Herzog Foundation.